All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Holder. I am an environmental scientist with the California State Water Resources Control Board. And I am the statewide Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program, SWAMP Bioaccumulation Monitoring Program Coordinator. And myself and Sherry Norris, who is the Executive Director of the California Indian Environmental Alliance, and Sarah Ryan, who's an environmental director for the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians. We've all been working together for the past couple of years to put together this training series. They hopefully will be able to join us today and chime in on a couple of areas, but I'm going to be your main MC, as it were, for today. So with that, I wanted to just kind of get a sense of who was in the room with us today. And so I'm going to launch a quick Zoom poll. Hopefully you all see that on your screen. Can I get like a thumbs up or something? Cool. Okay, great. I see folks are starting to take the poll. Give it a couple of minutes. Again, this won't be shared with anyone. This is just for us, so we get to see who's in the room with us today. And I suspect more folks will be joining us throughout the morning. But it looks like everyone has answered. Y'all are fast. Your coffee's kicked in faster than mine. So I just shared the results. Are you able to see those on your screen? Cool. So it looks like most of the folks in the room are the field team or the data managers for your tribal environmental programs, which is great, with some environmental program leadership, which is also great. Awesome. Welcome. Thanks. I am going to keep moving. We've got flexibility in our agenda today. We've reserved lots of time for questions and discussion. I've kind of popped that at the end of sections, but feel free to chime in at any point. If you have a question, unmute, raise your hand. Feel free to turn your cameras on if that's comfortable for you. And so for the first half of today, we're just going to I want to give a little bit of insight on as to how this training came to be and some information about the SWAMP Bioaccumulation Monitoring Program and Safety Eat Workgroup, how to get involved if that's something of interest to you. And then we'll take a break about halfway through. I'm hoping close to around 10:30. And the last half, I kind of want to dive into how our data can be used or how it is being used, and then save the bulk of the time for questions and discussion for whatever comes up for y'all. Could be about bioaccumulation monitoring in general, the training series, whatever makes sense. That's your time. And then we'll kind of review the trainings that are coming up and close for the day and let you go about your day. Let's see how many of us are in the room. There's 16 of us on the call right now. We could make time for introductions if that's something that feels comfortable. I suspect more people are going to be joining. So maybe if you want to share, say hello, share your name and affiliation in the chat. And then if you have questions or whenever you speak, just go ahead and introduce yourself. Does that sound okay for folks? Okay, I'm seeing a thumbs up. Thanks. Awesome. Great. Okay, so we're gonna keep it moving then. So as I mentioned, Sherry Norris with the California Indian Environmental Alliance, or SIA, was really the inspiration and the impetus for us to partner and put together this training. So I really want to acknowledge that up front. If it weren't for Sherry's partnership with the program and idea and really encouragement to create this training, we wouldn't be here today. And it's taken, I think she brought it up to me in, maybe 2021 when we first started, speaking regularly. So it's taken a couple of years to get us here. And my hope is that it's only the beginning of our partnerships with our respective bioaccumulation monitoring programs. So the next couple of slides, I was hoping Sherry would be with us to kind of talk about how awesome SIA and their program is, but I guess I get the privilege of bragging on her work a little bit. So all of the content on these slides is directly from their website, so I'm not making anything up, and or a reflection of my own experience with working with Sherry. So SIA, if you aren't aware, was created in 2006 at the request of California tribes and their leadership and members to address issues around consumption of fish and shellfish and other things, impacts of the gold rush. And since then have done great work providing educational resources and training to a suite of groups, among other technical support and things like that, and that'll be in the next slide. And as I mentioned during early conversations, Sherry really highlighted and elevated for me the need of the statewide program to help tribal governments build capacity and provide ways to support their programs in a way that still maintains tribal sovereignty and governance. And so this training is hopefully one way we can do that. Basically by sharing what we know about how we've been monitoring and making things more transparent so you can pick and choose what works for you and integrate that into your programs in a way that makes sense. So here's just some links to the core SIA programs, again, focused on mercury, tribal health, tribal self-advocacy, and leadership, particularly for youth programs. And I also want to flag that SIA also provides technical support for tribal beneficial uses. I think I'm seeing some names that maybe have been in the tribal strategic TBU strategic caucus, which SIA leads and facilitates that for folks. So as I mentioned, my conversations personally with Sherry and SIA really began in 2021 when we have incoming Civic Spark Fellows. So they're one-year fellowships for students with, I think the minimum is an associate's degree, usually associates or bachelor's. And they work for the water boards, but then part of the component of that fellowship is working directly with local governments according to the Civic Spark language. And we really wanted to use that fellowship as an opportunity to strengthen our partnership with tribal governments. And so we reached out to Sherry, and Sarah is another recipient of the Civic Spark Fellowship, to think about projects that are helpful and meaningful to support tribal needs locally and then throughout the state. And Sherry's project that we've been working on has been focused on the science behind the thresholds that kind of impact consumption and the consumption of fish and shellfish. We've been working for a couple of years to wrap our heads around the project and make progress in a way that is helpful and easy to communicate to broad audiences, and we're really close. We're working on web pages and products now, and so my hope is that by the end of this training series, at the end of the year, we'll have things to share for y'all. As I mentioned, we started developing this training series together with other partners who will become your instructors for future trainings in 2021. And we also worked together on a Science for Communities water quality project with the Delta Stewardship Council in 2022. And I just got an email from them a couple of weeks ago asking us to rejoin that effort. So I'm excited to work with Sherry again, hopefully this year. These slides, everything with blue underline is a link, and I will PDF these at the end of our training today and send them out to everyone that was registered for today, including you. And then I'll also be sharing the link to the recording, again, minus the Q&A sessions, if that's something that you don't want shared publicly, and I'll be posting the recording on the training series webpage. So just some grounding on bioaccumulation. Many of you are already tribal experts, or tribal monitoring experts. So if you know all this already and you want me to move faster, please let me know. But just some grounding for all of us. In the most simple terms, it's the accumulation of substances, pollutants in an organism. We're mostly thinking about fish and shellfish, and the accumulation of pollutants like mercury and PCBs and other things in that tissue. And the pollutants work their way up the food web. And when we consume foods that contain enough of these pollutants, we can have really serious adverse health effects from reproductive problems, issues with the nervous system, child neural development in fetuses and children, cancer, and other horrible things, which is why we have a bioaccumulation monitoring program to understand where those risks are and to help folks reduce those risks and eat fish and shellfish in a way that is safe. So in order to do all of that, we need to understand the levels of bioaccumulated pollutants in tissue in the things that we eat. So it also helps us understand the overall quality of waters. And again, that data can help inform the health risks associated with consuming those species. And on the bottom right of this slide, you can see kind of really small image of a fish advisory that's developed by the Office of Environmental Health Hazards Assessment, or OIHA. And those advisories can help tell us which species are safer to eat in water bodies throughout the state. And I think most importantly, these monitoring programs can help us see trends in where things are becoming safer to eat or not, and how well our government programs to protect and restore water quality are actually doing with their regulatory actions. So at this point, we wanted to pass the baton to Sarah Ryan, who was going to talk about the tribal monitoring program that she leads for the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians, but I don't see her in attendance, and I don't want to speak for her and her monitoring program. So we'll skip this part for now, and then when Sarah is able to join us, we will circle back. So close your eyes. Spoilers, don't look at the coming slides. The key thing here, and one thing that we really want to highlight as part of this training, is acknowledgement that we, the statewide bioaccumulation monitoring program, we're not the only ones conducting bioaccumulation monitoring, and tribal governments have their own awesome environmental programs. And as part of this training, I'm hoping we can kind of strengthen our community statewide of bioaccumulation monitors and share our respective expertise so that all of our programs can do more with the resources that we have, and so that we can learn from each other. That said, and along those same lines, there's a lot on this slide. The key takeaway here is that bioaccumulation monitoring from like a statewide lens has been happening for quite some time, since the 1970s. Through a lot of legislative mandates, bills, things like that. The Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program, or SWAMP, that's what we're going to focus these trainings on. That was established in 2000, and the Bioaccumulation Monitoring Program was rolled up in around 2006. And I came on board in 2020, and we've been doing a lot of things since then, but there's been a lot of bioaccumulation monitoring by the statewide program and our partners since early 2006. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the four green squares at the bottom of the slide throughout this training. Before I dive into the SWAMP statewide program and what we're working on, I like to kind of give a grounding of the water boards. When I started working for the water boards as a Sea Grant Fellow in 2019, I was really confused about who's doing what and what regulatory authorities. I came from a marine science background studying market squid, and so going to the less salty fields of aquatic and freshwater and the water boards was a little bit of an adjustment for me, and I wish someone had done this for me on my first week. So the water boards is actually made up of 10 California state agencies. I'm with the State Water Resources Control Board. That's a black star kind of in the middle of the state. And then there's 9 regional water quality control boards that you can see depicted on the slide. And as many of you probably already know, the water board's mission is to preserve, enhance, and restore the water quality throughout the state. And that's mainly what we're going to be focusing on today. In the state board, there's lots of offices and divisions. And so just kind of taking a high-level peek at our org chart, the Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program, there you can see on the far right of the slide, is part of one of the executive offices of the state board in the Office of Information Management and Analysis, or OIMA, as we call ourselves. And OIMA's scope is pretty weird and great. We lead the SWAMP monitoring programs throughout the state and the data management associated with that. We also support the organization in making all of the agencies' data from all of 10 agencies more open and useful and used through supporting a couple of the California Environmental Data Exchange Network, or CDN, supporting the use of the California Open Data Portal. We've also been focusing for the last 5 or more years on really thinking through how we can operationalize equity through our programs, specifically through engaging and partnering with our tribal government partners and other communities that are impacted by the water board's decision-making. And also just more generally developing partnerships within the water data community. There are some logos here on the slide. We're always looking for new partners in a lot of different areas. So if you have an interest in water and data, we'd love to hear from you. So kind of diving deeper into SWAMP, as I mentioned a couple of slides ago, SWAMP was created in 2000 in response to an assembly bill that basically acknowledged that there were a lot of different types of statewide monitoring, or different types of surface water monitoring throughout the state. And the legislature basically said that we need one program, consolidate, we need one thing. And so SWAMP was created through that mandate. And we fund and lead and facilitate collaboration of surface water monitoring with the water boards and many, 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 many partners throughout the state. And not just with bioaccumulation. We have 4 statewide monitoring programs focused on different topics. We're going to focus on bioaccumulation monitoring, the program that I coordinate and lead, because that's the focus of this training. But I also wanted to highlight that we have a statewide freshwater harmful algal bloom program. That is mostly a response program at this point. Folks throughout California can do whatever they need to do in a water body, and if they see that it looks kind of weird or smells funny, they can submit a form to tell us what they're noticing. And we have staff that throughout the state, both at the state board, and then we have regional coordinators throughout the state that lead the response. And so they'll go out into the water bodies and take a water sample and kind of get it tested and work with our partners to help folks understand how it's safe to utilize that water body to lower the risk of impacts from harmful algal blooms. We have a bioassessment monitoring program that again goes out throughout the state and looks at essentially bugs and algae throughout the our rivers and streams to understand how healthy our rivers and streams are. We have a toxicology and contaminants program that looks at pollutants and sediments, among other things, at the bottom of water bodies to see what we should be concerned about there. Spoiler alert, pesticides are everywhere and it's a huge problem. And then we also provide funding to each of the 9 regional water boards for their own monitoring programs that are specific to the surface water monitoring needs of that region. So again, a slide with lots of content on it. We'll be sharing the slides, so this is hopefully more of a resource for y'all. But our mission is basically to provide data information to not just the water board's decision makers, but also the public and our partners on the status, trends, and conditions of water bodies throughout surface waters throughout the state. And really to maintain consistent monitoring so folks can, as I mentioned, see where the high risk areas are, how things are getting better or worse over time, and really understanding how effective our clean water projects and programs are at protecting and restoring surface water quality throughout the state. So this is a figure that kind of represents an adaptive management framework. And you notice SWAMP, the We Are Here button, as kind of in the blue section for the monitoring. And this is kind of a way for us to begin to articulate how the water boards work together with our various programs to achieve the state's, the water board's vision and mission. So we've got SWAMP statewide and regional monitoring programs and lots of other types of monitoring in one section. Those data are used in different components of different programs of the State Water Board to help assess water quality throughout the state. The biggest one that we'll be talking about and that we talk about often that uses the bioaccumulation monitoring data is our integrated report, and they do statewide water quality assessments every 2 years and list or unlist water bodies based on how that water quality meets or exceeds those thresholds that we talked about. Once a water body is listed, for example, if we kind of go into the plan section of this figure, that then triggers potentially other regulatory processes. The main one being the regional boards kind of they do maintain the authority to the enforcement and other things on a regional level. And so they might amend their basin plan to for example, incorporate tribal beneficial uses, but then also that connects to the enforcement actions and revising permits and things like that to improve and protect water quality. Ideally, all of this kind of is assessed semi-regularly through, identifying new strategic needs and improvements and things like that. And then that kind of feeds into our monitoring and we start the cycle all over again. Okay, before I dive into the bioaccumulation monitoring program, I've been talking at you for a half an hour. Does anyone have questions at this point before we dive deeper? Okay, great. And then I was just gonna bop over to you, Sarah. Come on up.
Hey, so good morning, Anna. And yeah, I think this is fantastic information because it, I guess, every tribe has, their own programs that they've prioritized and are working within all the different frameworks that, that are required. And, the states is its own thing too. It's how you guys have how you're implementing the Clean Water Act. So, but there's some similarities, of course, because we're talking about the Clean Water Act. So it's really cool to see how you're doing it. And tribes and states are the only entities that can do these things of TMDLs and water quality assessment reports. This is not something counties can do, or any other cities or any other groups. So, the way that you're doing it is, I think is helpful to, because it's, we go through similar, steps. So, and I guess, just in terms of these, trainings and these workshops is, how to best incorporate, the efforts of the tribes and the efforts of the state, in a way that's mutually beneficial, and also being able to access information that you guys have about water quality and all of that. So yeah, I just want to and thanks for the graphics. Good slides.
Thanks. And before I dive into the bioaccumulation monitoring program, we didn't go over the slides that you created this for the Big Valley program. Can I bop back over to those, and you want to share some highlights from your program?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. We're thinking too fast for my computer. It's freezing. Okay. I can advance for you. You just tell me how you want to move forward. Take it away, Sarah.
Thank you. So, hey everybody, over here at Big Valley, we're on Clear Lake, which is the largest natural freshwater lake in California. And because the tribe is so dependent on the health of the not only the water, but also the things that depend on the water, so the fish and wildlife basically, and the aquatic plants. We have a program that is looking at bioaccumulation and also just contamination. And so we thought that it would be helpful to share some of the stuff that we do, and in the hopes that certainly if anyone has any questions and just wants to talk about it, but also just to spark some ideas, stuff that might be helpful for the things that the other tribes might want to do in California. I do want to say that our program is, and I see Mike Shaver on the call, who's now at Potter Valley, but the water monitoring program on Clear Lake really started with Mike way back in the early 2000s or even late 90s. And, we've had a consistent set of people. Mike hired me in 2001. I've been working for the tribe since then. But, we've been really, really fortunate over here at Big Valley to have a, just a consistent set of people, and good overlap so that we keep, building the things that are important to the tribe. So anyway, if you want to move to the next slide. So everything on here are the types of monitoring that we do. It's sort of set up like this because we're also really into data management, but it just shows you the types of contaminants that we're looking for. And if we have partners, of course, we do stormwater when in the heavy rains, and that's funded by the Clean Water Act, the 106 grant. There's a couple of post-fire monitorings. We started the first post-fire monitoring in the county back in 2015 after the Valley Fire, which was just a terrible fire here, burned many homes. So we were able to work with the Central Valley Regional Board to basically pay for the lab analysis. But that was a reactive program. It then led to development of when the Mendocino Complex fire happened to do additional water monitoring. That funding, the free lab basically went to the county. So, but we still assisted in one of the creeks. Then we have our cyanotoxin monitoring program that started as a reactive program, but we've since become proactive about it and do that on a regular basis, not only on the lake but also in the creeks. And this is an ongoing thing that we provide information to the county about, or to well, not just the county, but to the state and to the feds. And this is so that we can look at the toxin levels that could impact the members as they're with not only food but also just traditional uses of the water, and making sure that we are putting out proper notices regarding the risk. Let me just bounce back to the stormwater is also a reactive program. We want to see if the land use that we're doing and the management that we have for the drains and basically the yards and the parking lot and things, that those are working. We do have a nutrient buffer pond, which is to deal with the sediment runoff and the stuff that runs off from the roads, and so before it goes into the lake. So we're basically just seeing if our mitigation measures are working, and that's why we have that stormwater program. You want to scroll down or next
Yeah.
slide? So we have, and this is a program that Mike started, the Clear Lake monitoring, water chemistry, basically. And we've got sites that are important to the tribe, some deep sites and some shallow sites. And it basically allows us to see the trends. I mentioned the creek cyanotoxin monitoring. We're doing both research and also analysis of the toxin levels during this time when the creeks are running, with, of course, the water chemistry in the creeks. And now we have we're looking at groundwater. So, and this is not bioaccumulation, but it's just, gives us a sense of, what's happening to the surface water flow based on the groundwater, and also water depth in the creeks. Next slide, please. I think there's another one.
Yeah.
Okay. Continuous lake monitoring, we've got data loggers basically in several locations, working with water districts on the lake, and that's giving us a sense of trends in those areas. I mentioned the groundwater monitoring. That continuous lake monitoring is, we're looking at particularly about cyanobacteria blooms, but if you've got other water quality conditions like DO, we're really watching the dissolved oxygen in the lake to see if it's going below the standards, which it is quite often actually, and that's harmful to fish. We are doing tissue monitoring, so that's more of a bioaccumulation thing. We've got funding and multiple grants to look at cyanotoxins, heavy metals, and pesticides in multiple food sources. So we're doing that for we did it both for a pesticide program that the state is doing on the lake, but also just looking at contaminants as a whole. And this is for the tribal beneficial use development. Is there one more of
I
those, or
think
is that it?
there's one more. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. And then the tap water program, this is a CDC grant. This isn't specifically tribal focused, but it allows us to see how the contaminants of an area are impacting yet another use of Clear Lake, although some folks have their own wells, but we're requiring that these are wells that are near shore creeks or the lake, and also intakes that are pulling directly from these water bodies. So it's basically giving us a sense of what's going on groundwater wise, or surface water wise in these areas. So these are all, we put these things together because we thought it would give us a really good sense of what's happening in the area. And then we use the information for management purposes, to really help shift the management that's usually done by others, to make sure that it's protective of tribal uses, and so the data is really helpful in that sense. All right, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just, we really wanted to highlight the work of the Big Valley Tribe because it's so comprehensive, and not limited to bioaccumulation. Hopefully, the resources that we share through this training will be helpful to not just your bioaccumulation monitoring programs, but for other water quality monitoring programs that you have. And then also in future trainings, we'd like to continue a tribal monitoring spotlight. So if you want to share about the work that you're doing, and again, in hopes to build our collective monitoring community, we'd love to hear from you, and I can help coordinate to get you on our training agendas and things like that. And we are happy to offer honoraria for folks that are able and interested in doing that. So another thing there. I just heard from Sherry. Unfortunately, she's not going to be able to join us today, but so that means I just get to brag on how awesome working with her is without her here. But she will join us in a future training. So I think, yeah. So we've heard about the, well, first, any questions for Sarah before we move on? Okay. Well, like I mentioned at the beginning, we have lots of time for discussion and questions at the end of each section. So more time later. So among I mentioned the statewide SWAMP programs, the Bioaccumulation Monitoring Program is really the statewide program that focuses on bioaccumulation data and information throughout the state. We fund and coordinate monitoring throughout the state, mainly through our water boards programs. We're looking for other creative ways to support other bioaccumulation monitoring programs as well, but that's still in progress. As I mentioned, the Bioaccumulation Monitoring Program was kind of rolled up in 2006. I like to think of the program as like the back end. That's the facilitation and logistics and funding. We also have a front end version that's more publicly facing. In 2006, this was called the Bioaccumulation Oversight Group, or the BOG. In 2021, we rebranded, and now we're called the Safety Eat Workgroup. But if folks are more familiar to the BOG, the STU is really the same thing, and shinier shoes, I guess. So again, the main takeaway from this really busy figure is we've done the majority of our monitoring in lakes and reservoirs. Those are the dark blue bars. Since 2007, focused mostly on bass because they're great indicators of bioaccumulation in lakes and reservoirs. We also do coastal monitoring along the coast, north, central, and south. And we do that, about every 10 years with our partners in the Southern California Bight and other partners. And then we did a very thorough rivers and streams survey in 2011 and 12, and we did some targeted monitoring in the Central Valley back in 2022. Again, you can see the little "We Are Here" pin. This year, we're focused on coastal monitoring in Central and Northern California. And I'll talk a little bit later. We're at this moment in our program where we can assess and reassess our priorities moving forward, and think about which places, species, and pollutants we should prioritize with our monitoring budget. And there's opportunity for tribes to be involved and inform the decisions of that process. So if you're more of a map head like I am, and you like seeing points on places, here's just kind of big picture of where we've monitored for those 3 water body types: the lakes and reservoirs on the left, coastal areas in the center, and rivers and streams on the right. These are the main planned places, that the locations that we had in our monitoring programs. But as I'll talk about a little bit later, every year as we're kind of finalizing our monitoring plan, we put out a call for requests for sometimes additional locations. So there might be locations that we have sampled that aren't reflected on these maps. More often, it's additional species or pollutants to collect and analyze. And again, there's links here to each of the different pages associated with these. So if you're interested in old monitoring plans, quality assurance program plans, things like that, that you want to copy and paste and use for your plans, please reuse and remix whatever we have to share. This is a summary, high-level summary of our analyte suite for each location. As you can see, mercury and selenium has been a heavy hitter for us in all areas, as well as PCBs. And a large reason of that is to support regional boards, TMDLs, total maximum daily loads, that sort of part of their programs. But then also our partner in OIHA, as I mentioned, develops fish advisories, mostly using mercury, selenium, and PCB data. But we've also done analysis for OC pesticides, PBDEs, ditoxins, and limited sites algal toxins. And as we'll talk about for our future, we're thinking about what else should be added to this analyte suite. Yeah, Sarah.
I think, regarding OEHA's fish advisories, they're not out there collecting. So, the data, and it's not necessarily so easy for tribes to just, for their data to be used for fish toxins and methylmercury. So I think, I don't know, I can't remember, Anna, if you're going to be talking about it in this, in today's training, but it might make sense to go over, what actually does it take for the state to to be able to use tribal data, because you could go measure a place 2 or 3 times, and that doesn't mean that's going to get in there. It has to be statistically significant. You need to have a quap behind it and things like that. But it does show that, tribal data is used. And so if there are fish and there are contaminants, that in your area, I mean, probably it's nobody else is doing the analysis. I mean, on Clear Lake, yeah, we're doing it, but most water bodies, it's not. And if you get into the websites that show the methylmercury levels and whatnot, a lot of them, it's quite old data, so this is another reason why tribal programs are so important, is because you can really focus on the foods and the important, the culturally important plants and animals that and looking at the looking at the contamination in those, because this program of the states is, that they've got a certain focus, and they have been, at least in the past, been missing some of the, the important fish for the tribes, and also the locations. So, so this is great. Also, just the algal toxins is a tough one, because it's not necessarily seen as a bioaccumulant.
Right.
So, it's hard to, so there aren't actually any fish advisories for cyanotoxins, because from what I've heard from OIHA, it takes like 18 months to get those things set up, and they don't think the cyanotoxins are in there for that length of time. They are in there when people are eating them, but not necessarily for the 18 months or so. That we're still trying to work that out with OIHA, but yeah, just wanted to put in a plug for, this is why tribal programs are so important, because you really can add more water bodies and more, tissues that are important to you.
Yeah, great point, Sarah. Our next training where we talk about developing monitoring plans and things like that, Jay Davis, if you want to give a wave, is going to be leading that training along with our SWAMP IQ, our kind of data manager, Tessa Foget. And we've also invited Wes Smith from OIHA to help shine a light on the guidance that we take from OIHA on how we collect our data so that it can be used in those advisories. So that'll kind of start the OIHA conversation. But then Wes, Wes, myself, Sherry, and others all agreed that having a little bit of a deeper dive into like just OIHA process and how they get their data and how they use it and what they need to make advisories and things like that. So a deeper dive on OIHA will be at the end of this year. You might have noticed in our dates, we kind of have a bunch of trainings from now through, I think, March or April, and then there's a big break. And then we circle back in September. We did that break because we wanted to talk to folks conducting monitoring, and March through about September, October, November is monitoring season. So we didn't want to compete with those efforts. And then, yeah, plus one to the algal toxin piece, the program has started thinking about that in a process we're calling the realignment that I'll talk about later. And I can share, the guidance that we received from our harmful algal bloom team on how to best assess and kind of monitor at the nexus of bioaccumulation and cyanotoxins, which we're still learning on how to do that. So as I mentioned, we also have, I like to call it the front end, the public facing end of our program, which is a safety work group. And this is really the space where we, in a public arena, have conversations around coordinating, planning, highlighting the work that others are doing in the bioaccumulation space. And I often get folks that reach out to me directly, hey, do you know about this lab or this thing? And my first suggestion is to bring it up to our safety work group with many, many more experts than myself, so we can kind of see what those asks are in the bioaccumulation monitoring community. And there's a higher level of certainty that someone on the call will be like, oh yeah, I've done that thing. Let me share this link or this resource or this whatever. And so really using that safety eat work group, or the stew, we call ourselves the swampy stew, to really nurture and support that coordination that needs to happen if we're thinking about bioaccumulation on a statewide lens, and also, leveraging opportunities and sharing opportunities that our partners can get involved in or benefit from. We utilize the safety work group for that as well. And we also have a peer review panel that reviews our monitoring plans and things like that to help make sure that we're incorporating the best available science in how we monitor. So here's a shameless plug for getting involved in this too. Membership is open to anyone that's interested in bioaccumulation. You don't have to do anything to become a member except for attend a meeting, hopefully more than one. And like I mentioned, it's a space that already exists to help with coordination and communication in folks interested in bioaccumulation monitoring. And that's the main space where we solicit feedback. The program solicits feedback from our regional board partners, OIHA, and hopefully in the future, many of our tribal partners, to help inform how we should be prioritizing our monitoring dollars to generate that data that's helpful for your tribal monitoring programs and your tribal programs. So I also mentioned that we're in this moment of our long-term bioaccumulation monitoring program where we get to kind of assess what's been working for the last umpteen years since 2007 and how we might want to adjust our priorities. As I'm sure all of you know, if you're monitoring experts yourselves, it's not inexpensive to conduct monitoring, whether local or statewide. And so we really want to make sure we stretch our dollars as far as we can. And while we do that, we're supporting not just our state board priorities, but the priorities of our tribal government partners and other partners interested in bioaccumulation. So in the future, or in the past, I should say, our monitoring feedback process has mostly centered state and regional water board programs and OIHA, again, because those have historically been the heaviest users of our data that we generate. In the future, I'd really love to hear from more tribal partners to help make sure that we're monitoring in places for species and analyzing pollutants that are supportive of your needs as well. So we generally, we're in the process now where we're thinking about the longer term plans for the next 5 or 10 years, high level priorities about how we're going to monitor moving forward, what we're going to prioritize with the resources that we have. And then annually around March, we submit the permits for the following year's monitoring. So in around July, we start, like, while the monitoring, like for this year, the coastal monitoring will be taking place. Our monitoring teams at Moss Landing and Marine Labs will be out in the field collecting all the goods, right? But around July, we'll also be kind of gathering in the Safety Eat Work group and thinking about the monitoring plan for next year. And we put out a call for requests. So from the regional boards and OIHA, but I'm gonna expand this request out to tribes and other monitoring groups, basically saying, I see you're monitoring at this lake or coastal area or river, whatever. Could you pop over and get this other location while you're out there? And if you're at that place, try collecting these species. And we recommend analyzing for these pollutants. So, you know, our partners are really telling us if we have funds to stretch, what other things should we gather or analyze while we're already out in the field. Those requests have been due on September 1 over the past couple of years. Again, that's so we can finalize things and get the permit submitted on time. We present the final monitoring plan around January. Historically, it hasn't really changed that much, again, in terms of the locations that we monitor, but the species and pollutants and those add-ons are highlighted during that January meeting. And then we do the thing, March through November. Folks are monitoring, we're submitting samples for analysis, things like that. And then wash, rinse, repeat for the next year. So these are the upcoming Safety Eat Work Group meetings. We have one tomorrow. From 9:30 to 12:30. This will have some quick updates from our, you know, the things that we usually kind of bring up at every quarterly Safety Work Group meeting, but we're also going to be hearing from OIHA on the things that they need and they think we should maybe prioritize for our long-term monitoring moving forward. So it won't be a presentation of like how they came to those decisions. That'll be at a different time, but high level understanding of what their consumption advisory priorities I think are going to be moving forward and how we can support that through data generation on the programmatic end. And then in February, we're focusing that meeting on the long-term monitoring priorities process and really making space to hear from tribes, agencies, and other community-based organization or CBO partners interested in bioaccumulation. That agenda is still pretty open. We've got Biomonitoring California, the San Francisco Bay Regional Monitoring Program, and the Southern California Bight Regional Monitoring Program on the agenda. But if folks would like to highlight the work that they're doing or provide recommendations on how you think we should be monitoring moving forward, this is a great place for that. If you literally want to give voice and have a 20-minute spot or whatever makes sense to share that. We have other ways of providing feedback that don't require public speaking if that's more comfortable for you, and I'll talk about that in a second. In March, we're going to be kind of reflecting on this long-term monitoring priorities assessment process. We actually started it in November, I think, of last year. And so that'll be where we present a synthesis of the feedback that we've heard over that time and start collectively thinking about what the group thinks our priorities should be. I'm going to bring that back to my management, the folks that control the budgets, right? And they'll take that into consideration when we set our priorities for the coming years. And then I'll present that at the April 17th meeting, along with the proposed monitoring plan at that time for 2025. So I mentioned this is a great opportunity for tribes to give our program feedback if that's something that is of interest to you. As I mentioned, if you want to give voice, have an actual space on the agenda for tomorrow, super last minute, or February 28th, let me know. We also have a tribal and community-based organization open forum, which is you don't have to plan ahead, you just kind of show up, and if you want to share your thoughts for a couple of minutes, that's great. And you don't have to prepare slides or tell me ahead of time or anything like that. So if you're available during those times, the January 31st agenda is already posted on our website. And the open forum is towards the end of the meeting, I think at 11:20, around then. And then February 28th, we'll have another open forum in addition to those presentations. So if that feels great for you and you want to, like I mentioned, give voice to sharing what your priorities are or how you think the bioaccumulation monitoring program should spend our dollars, we'd love to hear from you. Again, if public speaking is not your thing and you don't want to give voice during a meeting, there's also this priority survey, which can be anonymous if you'd like. We're asking folks to complete it by March 1st. There are 10 questions. Only 4 are required and they're multiple choice. So it could literally take like 2 minutes to complete this. Or if there's lots of space for open-ended responses. So if you want to take more time and add, specific locations, species and pollutants, there's opportunity for that as well. The 4 required questions are on the slide. Let's see. I saw Sarah's in the chat. If I could provide a link. Let's see if I can. I think I can. Okay, great. Here it is. Thanks for asking that, Sarah. So here are the 4 required questions. Again, they're multiple choice. Really getting a sense of what type of organization or government that you're affiliated with. So there's a tribal government affiliation. You could check that box. If you want to provide your name and contact information, you can, but that is not required information at all. The second question is really about where you would like us to prioritize monitoring. In the sense of those 3 water body types, so lakes and reservoirs, rivers and streams, coastal areas, and you get to select 2 of 3. And to be quite honest, I'm really looking at, for the program, we're going to have to make hard choices. We can't afford, unfortunately, to monitor everywhere we want to monitor and in as comprehensive a way that we'd like to monitor in terms of analyzing all the species for all the things, right? So we're going to have to make hard choices about, locations that we prioritize, species that we prioritize, and things like that. So these multiple choice questions are going to help us make those decisions. The third question, which species would you like to see prioritized? I think it's fish, shellfish, and other, and you get to pick one of those three. But again, for all of these, there's another question that's open response. So you can provide as much detail and nuance as you'd like, totally acknowledging and understanding that being required to select one of 3 or 5 of 10 is not ideal in terms of what your needs truly are. The last question is which pollutants you'd like to see. So there was that table of the analyte suite that I presented before. It's basically that. There's 10, I think 9 with an other option, and you get to pick 5. So those are the required questions. Again, it can be anonymous. We ask that folks complete it by March 1st so that I can integrate that with our synthesis process and present at the March 29th meeting, 27th meeting. I can't read my own handwriting, but it's at the end of March. Before I move forward, any questions about that? Yeah, Sarah.
So just to make sure I understand, the way that you set up your monitoring programs is so that the data, you do enough samples and enough frequency to then be able to use it for, I guess, yeah, for advisory purposes or for listing purposes in terms of a water body. And yeah, I'm curious about that, like how, and is it the bioaccumulation monitoring program where you're going to be putting out, like, this is what we're going to be looking for the next 5 years, or is it a 5-year plan, or how do you put out like strategy plans?
Yeah, so this is the first time the bioaccumulation monitoring has put out a long-term strategy for at least 10 years, probably closer to around 2006 or 7. Jay, I see your body language maybe wanting to unmute. Feel free to chime in here.
Yeah, we haven't really done it in a comprehensive way like we're doing right now. We've developed long-term plans by water body, but not a comprehensive overall plan.
Yeah, so this is, we're mixing things up, and it's going to be a different process that we're all learning from. And then we do shorter term, like annual monitoring plans by water body, and we'll continue to do that. And then there was another part of your question. Oh, we design our programs so that our monitoring programs so that we can say something about statewide bioaccumulation quality, and what's getting better or worse over time. And again, we're wrapping up all of our longer term lake, coastal and river monitoring plans that we set over 10 years ago. So we're going to be summarizing those as that data comes in. And then we also collect data, as you mentioned, so that OIHA can develop fish advisories. So we use, collection and analysis methods, the number of species, things like that. OIHA kind of flags for us, we're really close to being able to make an advisory at this location, but we need X number of more samples of this thing. And so we can integrate that into our annual process, but then also our long-term process. And then the integrated report process, if folks aren't familiar with that, we can talk about that more later too, and we will. they conduct statewide assessments every 2 years. And so every 2 years, they do a fresh poll of whatever data exists and integrate that into their assessment and listing process. Does that answer your question? I'm sure I missed something.
No, that was perfect, but I missed who you said conducted statewide assessments every 2 years. I'm sorry. Who was that?
Our integrated report, the State Board Water Quality Assessment Program, but the integrated report team.
Okay, so they're looking for whatever data is available out there. So it's not like it's like OIHA where it's like, okay, where's the publicly available data, which is why if tribes submit into WQX that the data is preliminary, that data does not get used in any of these assessments. So it's worth considering making some of the information final in WQX, and then it would be pulled by the in that every 2-year assessment to to fold into the state of the waters of that area.
Yeah. And then also acknowledging that our statewide program, we don't monitor on tribal lands. And we don't want to unless you want us to. But we know that tribes use waters outside of their tribal lands. And if we can monitor at those locations and that's of interest to you, we want to be sure we have that kind of on our list so that we can prioritize that for monitoring and analysis, so it can be incorporated into all of those different things that we've mentioned. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about our program realignment efforts. Just like how I invented the long-term monitoring priorities assessment process, I also invented the realignment process. And so this kind of started, I was onboarded into this role in 2020. And one of my first tasks in that role was to look at all of the amazing things that the statewide program and at the time, the Bioaccumulation Oversight Group, or the BOG, have been doing since 2006. And really think about celebrating our achievements and the things that we do really, really, really well, like monitoring at lakes and reservoirs. But then also highlighting areas that need a little bit of more attention and funding. And the first is building stronger relationships with our tribal government partners and communities that are most impacted by consuming fish and shellfish that might have, the pollutants in their tissues. The next is building stronger connections and relationships with the water boards. We're 10 different agencies, and I'm sure you all may have experienced, or you might have guessed, we don't always talk to each other as much as we should. And so really strengthening those relationships so we can coordinate and communicate more consistently throughout the state. And the next is filling data and information gaps regarding where it is safe or safest to eat fish and shellfish in our waters. And as Sarah pointed out, we aren't able to monitor at all the places for all the things. And so we've missed locations, we've missed species that are important to folks that consume fish and shellfish for tribal uses and other subsistence uses. And so we designed this 3-year realignment process to kind of get at those, I call them the pillars of the realignment process, to really focus our energy and funding on supporting those areas that needed that attention. So the 3-year process, during the first year, it's really all about data information so that we can monitor and develop a monitoring plan, filling those gaps of where have we missed monitoring in the region, which species are important that people want data and information on, and which analytes are important. And I'll give examples of all of these in the coming slides. The second year, while the monitoring is happening, so we contract with the Moss Landing Marine Labs, Marine Pollution Studies Lab. So they go out and collect the monitoring for us. While they're doing that, we're talking about communication and what the needs are. How my program and the safety work group can do better at communicating about the data that we have, the resources that we have, and communicating with the folks, the tribal governments and the communities that really want to utilize this information to make informed decisions about how to eat fish and shellfish safely. And then in the third year, the data from monitoring is starting to come in, so we can kind of get a sense of what we're learning from the monitoring plan that we put together in the first year. But then thinking about, this is the end of this formal 3-year process, but what does partnership and collaboration look like moving forward? We've completed this process. Did I miss this slide? Yeah. We completed this process in San Diego. We wrapped it last year. And we had, we used an advisory committee structure. We're going to shift things around moving forward. But for the San Diego realignment, we held 7 advisory committee meetings that included tribal government representatives in the San Diego region. We conducted monitoring according to that monitoring plan that I mentioned. We talked about the communication and outreach needs and developed a communication and outreach plan that really gives me tasks of things that I can do better to help make resources, data, and information more clear in the public spaces. And we've already, we're tackling that list and have already made great strides since that plan was developed last year. There's a summary of longer term recommendations that I actually need to update, but during these conversations, concerns about plants, for example, that are of interest to tribal communities in particular, and interest in understanding, how pollutants accumulate in plants, and how can the bioaccumulation monitoring program utilize their resources to help inform the safety of using those things for tribal culture and needs. A lot of great work has been done by our California Cyanohab work group, CCHAB work group, on this in the algal toxin space. But the bioaccumulation monitoring space is catching up for a multitude of reasons. And other long-term recommendations and needs for our program, like providing resources to tribes and communities to conduct their own monitoring, making it easier for tribes to submit data into WQX, and then for us to take on the work of incorporating that into our state databases and processes. Things like that can't really be addressed in that 3-year process with our specific lens, but that I wanted to document so that we could kind of point back to them as we think about long-term monitoring priorities. We're working on a data report that summarizes the 2022 monitoring. We're still waiting on some organics data. So one thing to note there is, I mentioned earlier that the majority of our statewide monitoring has focused on mercury, selenium, and PCBs. But what we heard from our advisory committee, again, comprised of tribal governments and representatives from community-based organizations, was that PFAS is really important. And so we analyzed for PFAS. We also heard that the assumptions that OIMA makes to make their fish consumption advisories, which is that folks are consuming a skin-off fillet of fish, don't always reflect how the lived experience of tribes and communities that consume fish for cultural purposes. Sometimes people eat with skin on or the whole body or things like that. And so the advisory committee tasked us with analyzing whole body fish just to see how things shake out in terms of the concentrations of mercury and PCBs and PFAS if people consume fish or shellfish in that way. I'll also acknowledge that our statewide program has had a focus on fish purely from a resource limitation issue. And the San Diego Advisory Committee really wanted us to collect shellfish and test shellfish for mercury and PFAS and things like that. And so we dedicated monitoring resources to do that. So we collected shellfish during that time. And so those results will be captured here in the data report that's coming this year. We also heard that the concern of cyanotoxins and how cyanotoxins are the nexus of bioaccumulation and cyanotoxins. At that time, when we were having these conversations in 2021, the recommendation that we received from our statewide harmful algal bloom program and those FHAB experts was to collect water samples and test for cyanotoxin in the water to get a sense of the baseline levels in that water body, as Sarah mentioned, because the analyzing or assessing cyanotoxins in tissue, we aren't quite there yet with the science in the sense of that analysis staying relevant once the tissue is collected and how long it takes for the lab to do the analysis, and for the analysis at that time to be fiscally I guess, useful. It's pretty expensive for us to do that. It was at that time. So we're waiting for the science to catch up a little bit, but we're still exploring that nexus of harmful algal blooms and bioaccumulation. And we're just kind of like in the space waiting to learn, and we're utilizing the realignment process to kind of do those pilot studies and figure out what our place in that nexus looks like. So this is a map of the locations that were identified by the advisory committee as important places that the statewide program may have monitored, but they wanted to kind of go back because the data might be old and they wanted newer data, or areas that we hadn't monitored before. The red dots are those that we weren't able to monitor during the year 2 in 2022, but the regional water board has kind of taken it into their monitoring, and they have they're planning on monitoring those locations in coming years. We were able to sample all of the blue locations, like the top 10 water bodies, for a multitude of things. And the monitoring and analysis work plan kind of, it does show our justification and how the priority process was working, and all of the details that our monitoring partners, the folks that submit our permits and do the monitoring, all the details that they need to do those processes. So moving this year, for the next 3 years, we're focusing on San Francisco and the San Francisco region. And we're kicking things off. We sent emails out last night to tribes that were on the Native American Heritage Commission list for that region. We sent emails to tribal leadership and environmental contacts that we had that were, again, on the NAHC list. So folks can opt into this process if they're in the San Francisco region. Our first workshop is going to be February 29th over Zoom. And it's going to be an introduction to the process and kind of a kickoff on what the next steps will look like. And it's only open to tribal government partners and community-based organizations. And then after that, we're going to have 2 additional workshops in March. One will be for tribes only, and the other will be for community-based organizations. One of the things we learned in the San Diego process was that it's really important for tribes to have their own space to talk about their needs, and it's inappropriate at times to share that space with community-based organizations. We heard that loud and clear, and so we want to create and protect that space for tribes in the San Francisco region. So the March 6th and March 18th workshops, they're basically going to have the same content in terms of soliciting the feedback, but then the majority of the time will be for the tribal attendees in March 6th, or the CBOs on the March 18th to give us feedback so that we can begin to think about that monitoring plan. We will have more in-person meetings for the next in-person and virtual meetings for the next 3 years. But we want to get through these first workshops first to determine what that looks like. Yeah, Sarah.
I have a complicated question.
Great.
I have to figure out how to ask it. Okay, so the Bay Delta side of things, is that in this region? Does San Francisco region incorporate Bay Delta?
It incorporates a bay. The Delta might be a different region.
It's the Bay, but not the Delta.
Yeah.
So like it's shown on the map there, there's that boundary at the east end of Sassoon Bay.
Uh-huh.
That's the regional boundary.
Okay, because I know so San Francisco region operates in the same way as any other region, that the water bodies within it and then the contaminants within any tissues are all kind of part of the bigger picture. Whereas the Bay Delta, it's not necessarily like that because of how the waters come from. That's right, the San Francisco region and Region 5. So, okay, I guess I don't need to ask the question because I was gonna ask kind of like the yeah, but if this was specific, if this had a Bay Delta component, what that would mean in terms of where the contaminants were coming, if it was outside of the region, and how the water boards would look at, any contamination to be able to, deal with it upstream. But I guess that's not really applicable to this.
Well, maybe. I think so. The realignment is funded primarily by the statewide program, but we partner closely with the regional boards because we need to close that loop of coordination, right? We're limiting the workshop attendees for this community tribes that have identified themselves as part of the San Francisco region and the Native American Heritage Commission list, the NAHC list. So that's like where the invites have been limited to that regional boundary. Conversations don't need to stay limited in that sense because, as we know, water and fish don't care about our boundaries. They move wherever they're going to move. So if conversation comes up, if the folks attending those workshops, for example, really want to acknowledge and talk about the Bay Delta connections and the importance of those connections with our monitoring, we will happily have those conversations and talk about that throughout the process. So the invite list is restricted, but the conversations are not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds like something to put a pin in,
Yeah.
because like you said, the water and water fish go where they want to.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add that in terms of managing water quality, there are connections. The Bay and Delta, that's an arbitrary division there. It's all one big estuary, and in the control plans that Region 2 comes up with, like the mercury TMDL, the PCB TMDL, the selenium TMDL, they look at what's coming out of the Delta and entering the Bay and work with Region 5 on plans to control those sources of contaminants. So there's, it requires coordination between the regions to deal with the connectivity of the two regions, but there is this regulatory boundary that's been set to make things more manageable. So hope that helps.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the benefit of the statewide program is we get the statewide lens. So we're not as restricted in our monitoring to those boundaries, but we want to kind of work with them through our processes. So if you're interested in this process, the San Francisco realignment process, you want to stay informed, you want to be invited to those meetings, being from the San Francisco region, please let me know. If you're interested in this process, but you're not in the San Francisco region, feel free to reach out to me anyway. I'm always happy to talk about the work that we're doing or partnerships outside of the realignment process and how we can better coordinate and communicate together. So with that, we have time for any questions or discussion that folks want to have. And then I think after that, I had about a 10-minute break on our agenda, just so people can stretch and things like that. Anything that you want to circle back to? Any questions you have about the program? Topics that you think we should be thinking about? And I'll also note, this is the part where I will cut the recording if you'd like and not share it publicly. So this can be just for us. If you would like me to do that, you just need to say the word. Yeah, Megan, I saw you raise your hand.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Awesome. Would you mind going back to the San Diego realignment slide, the one
Yeah.
with the map of the sampling sites?
Mhm.
Excellent. Okay, just for clarification, the red dots are sites that the SWAMP team did not sample, but someone else did sample.
Close. They were identified as important by the advisory committee. The statewide program and our regional board partners were able to sample the blue locations in 2022. And then the statewide program, so that's me and Jay, and the regional board, the regional coordinators have kind of taken note of the red locations as places to prioritize for future sampling. So no one has sampled those locations yet, but our regional SWAMP coordinator, Chad Laughlin, is integrating that into, I mentioned the regional boards have their own like SWAMP funds. And so he's thinking about how he can use his SWAMP funds to sample at those locations in the future if the statewide program cannot. Does that help?
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. So there's not like a specific timeline set out for when the red dot sites would be sampled, but it's like in progress.
Yeah, it's in progress. And I know Chad is thinking about like as soon as possible. But budgets and contracts are super weird. So I don't want to get into that.
Yeah.
But yeah, but the exact planning is in progress, but I know it's a high priority for the regional board, not just for the SWAMP program, but we had the San Francisco region executive officer attend a couple of the meetings, and he was in full support of the priorities moving forward and things like that. So the region also has executive support to bring these priorities to life in the near future.
Okay, very cool. Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for the question. Sarah, do you have another complicated question for me?
No, it's sorry, that one really didn't end up being complicated. I was just more thinking about the boundaries and, and how the TMDLs go over there. But yeah, but I am curious about, there are no federally recognized tribes in the San Francisco area, and I understand you said that there's they use a list from Native American Heritage Commission. I know from attending the tribal beneficial use regular meetings that we have that SIA organizes, that that there are tribes that are engaged in that area, and I have no idea if they're on the NAHC list or not, but I do think that there are activities from tribes all over the state, and that might or might not be reflected on the NAHC list. So I'm just wondering if you've talked to the tribes of that area. I mean, obviously there are tribes in that area, but I wonder if you've talked to them to see if, in terms of the workshops, and you said it's by invitation only, if they are open to other tribes being present that aren't on the NAHC list. Just wondering why You know, if it was the tribes that asked for that to be locked down some.
Yeah. Yeah, great point. So we pulled from the NAHC list, but I'm also working really closely with the San Francisco region's tribal coordinator, who has spoken to tribes through their tribal beneficial use designation process and basin amendment planning process. And so if folks also maybe weren't on the NAHC list, but reached out and have engaged in that process, they were also sent an invitation. Federal recognition is irrelevant to tribes' participation in this process, but we utilize the NAHC list because that's kind of what's stated in our tribal consultation policy for the state board. But if there's a tribe that isn't on that list that wants to be involved in this process, they are more than welcome. And I'm not sure if I mentioned, we also offer honorariums to tribal and community-based organization participants for their contributions and engagement for every workshop that they attend. We offer the honorarium. So if you know of folks that are in the region, please share information broadly. We also shared an announcement on all of these efforts through our safety work group list. And anyone can kind of sign up for that. It's not restricted in any way. And then the State Water Board's Tribal Matters email list, which is, again, anyone can sign up, and it's statewide. So hopefully those folks that you were thinking about, Sarah, received an invitation or a ping on that. But and I can also say SIA was invited as part of the community-based organization CBO side of things, and hopefully is sharing broadly with all of their awesome tribal contacts too in the region. Awesome. Any other questions? Okay, great. Well, how does a 10-minute break sound for folks? I see a thumbs up, 2 thumbs up. Okay, great. 2 folks, even if it's just the 3 of us that want to break, I think we should take it. So why don't we, we'll break for 10 minutes and we'll come back at 10, let's round up. Let's come back at 10:50. See you then. Welcome back, folks. We've talked about the programs and the safety work group and upcoming opportunities at kind of a high level, but I also want to begin to address how folks can access and use the data that we generate and the products that we create. We'll have other trainings that go in much more detail, and before the end of today, we'll talk about the trainings that are coming up next. And if you aren't registered, we'll give you all of the spiel on all of that good stuff. So I'd like to use a little bit of time to go over again in more detail how our data are used by OIHA and the integrated report process in particular, but then how folks can access data that we generate for use in your programs or what you need it for. And then you'll notice I have a big chunk of time reserved for questions and discussion. So happy to go back to any of the content we've talked about or dive deeper in anything that I discuss moving forward. And then we'll kind of give you a look at what's coming next in the training series and how to register and engage. And Jay will give a plug for the next training since he's the lead instructor on that. Okay, so we've all stretched, had a nice break. If you're looking to access our data, so a different conversation I will have at a future training about the WQX and CEDN connection and conversation. So we're going to put a pin in that for now, but it's an important conversation that we will have during this training series. But for now, if you're thinking about accessing data to look and see what we've been doing and incorporate it into your programs, if that makes sense, there's two main ways that we recommend getting the raw data for those data managers that identified themselves during the poll at the beginning of our time together this morning. And that's through our California Environmental Data Exchange Network, or CEDN. And that contains data from all of our statewide SWAMP programs and non-SWAMP programs. Anyone can contribute data to SWAMP, as Sarah mentioned, but there has to be controlled vocabulary and things like that to get into CEDN. Similar to WQX, it's not the easiest database to work with, we acknowledge, and we're working on that. But the data in CEDN, it starts from 1950 to today, and folks can filter and download data as a CSV that can be easily incorporated into Excel or GIS or whatever you want to use it for. Another way to access the data that I think is a little bit easier, but you don't have as many like filtering opportunities, is through the California Open Data Portal. And this contains not just environmental data, but I think any California state agency can contribute data, have an account and add data to this portal. So for example, like Fish and Wildlife, California Fish and Wildlife, OIHA has some data on this portal. So this is a really good place if you're just looking for open data from state agencies. This might be a good place to start your search, including your search for our data. Again, 1950 to present, because all of our CEDN data gets pushed to the California Open Data Portal. I think within a week or so of it being added to CEDN. And I see a request to put those links in the chat. Let's see if my brains are not multitasking as good as they usually are. But thanks for bearing with me. Here's one, here's the other. And as I mentioned, these slides, I'm going to PDF these slides and send them along with a link to the recording by the end of this week. So you'll have all the links that are on the slides, you'll have them in your hands shortly. And if there's a desire to have the slides today, then I can do that as well and then follow up with the recording. Okay, so we know how to get the raw data that we would like from not just the Bioaccumulation Monitoring Program, but all SWAMP statewide programs and regional programs. But if you're looking for more refined versions of our data, we recommend for now using the San Francisco Estuary Institute Safe to Eat portal, which contains bioaccumulation data only from 1998 to about 2017. And you can download as you can filter the data. I'm going to do a demo on both of these here in a second. But you can download what you filtered, and there are certain reports that you can download as well. Coming very soon, we're going to have a demo on this in April at the 2024 or at the April Safe to Eat Workgroup meeting. We've been working on a SWAMP data dashboard that easily visualizes all of the statewide and regional SWAMP program data. And there's a bioaccumulation program, so you can easily filter to just bioaccumulation data. It contains data from the year 2000 to present, so it'll go past the 2017. Oh, and I see someone in our waiting room. And again, you'll be able to download filtered data and graphs. Our developer for the SWAMP data dashboard is still working on fixing some kinks and things like that. So I'd recommend joining the April 2024 STU meeting if you can, to get the full comprehensive demo. But we're going to take a sneak peek together, I think. But before I do that, Are there any questions about the data side of things before we dive in? Okay, great. So can folks see my screen and the customize a statewide map of fish contaminant? Okay, great. You are awesome with your thumbs up. Thank you so much, Brianna. Okay, so you're gonna get this notice when you join the SFEI Safety portal. There's a suite of instructions just to kind of get you started. If you wanna focus on a certain species, we usually do largemouth bass because that's where the bulk of our data are from. Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
I'm just wondering how many of the folks on the call have actually used the Safety Eat portal. I know Sherry is one of our more regular users. I'm wondering if anybody else has been using it. Maybe raise your hand.
Yep, we have over here.
Awesome. Great.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. So if there are ways that you use these tools that I don't show and you want to highlight that, please speak up and let us know. Again, selecting mercury just because that's where the most data are. And you can select your threshold. There's the sensitive population, and then women over 45 and men. We'll do the general population, and we want everything. And then it's confirming your choices and letting you know that you can change all of those options on the right side here. So there's a legend that pops up on the bottom left, and it shows the thresholds that align with OIHA thresholds, I believe. And you can click on a site and it shows you the data for, again, mercury, the last time it was sampled, and a little bit more information. But if I wanted to change and see what else has been sampled at this location, you can check and switch things in that viewer. You can also look at trends. So there's a nice little figure here with the species that have been analyzed. Again, with the selections that you've made, you can see what other locations and species have been sampled in nearby locations with the distance. And then you can print a report to retrieve everything that you've identified and save that to your desktop. So an easy way to engage and play with the data. Anything that other folks want to highlight? I see a couple of things in the chat. Let me catch up. Yeah, so there's a question in the chat asking about the OIHA concentrations and if they're based on sport fish consumption. So that's exactly right. The OIHA concentrations are based on recreational use, sport fish, recreational rates. We're in conversations with OIHA to see what creating thresholds and objectives and equations and all of the stuff that goes into accounting for the fact that tribes and other communities that consume fish for subsistence or cultural purposes consume fish differently at higher rates using different methods than the average recreational user. We don't have a silver bullet on that yet, but we're having those conversations, and OIHA is, open and engaged in those conversations, and we're really just thinking about a way forward for that. And there are other things upcoming with the program that will help that process. Does that answer your question, Sarah? I know you have to jump.
Yes, yeah. So in other words, the yellow of, being greater than 1.31 parts per million for methylmercury and Bass is, for subsistence consumption, it might be something like 0.22, so yeah,
Right.
it's really critical to get that layer on there,
Yeah.
because that subsistence consumption is occurring in multiple places. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm glad that's being worked on, and that might be something that we can push through the Tribal Advisory Committee at Cal EPA as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. I love that support.
I can elaborate a little more on that, Anna.
Sure.
Yeah, these are thresholds that OIMA uses for their advisories. Like the 1.31 is the no consumption level for the general population, and at the higher consumption rate end, the less than 0.22, shown in the legend there on the left. I forgot what the consumption rate is there, but this hasn't been updated for a while, and OIMA, since this was developed, has developed advisory tissue levels for higher rates of consumption. So I think if this was to be updated, this sort of default range, we would have even lower concentrations. But this portal does allow you to use your own thresholds too. So if you want to pop in a threshold that's based on a higher consumption rate, an advisory tissue level threshold, you can do that. But yeah, it's based on the OIMA values and different consumption rates with some flexibility for users to enter their own.
Thanks, Jay.
Mhm.
So this, if you're trying to access data up to 2017, right now, this is the place that we would recommend you go. And we're still working on getting data after 2017 into our databases. There's a whole saga and story behind that, but it is relatively recent comparatively. Yeah, we've got a request to learn how to enter other consumption rates. Can you be my puppet, Jay, and tell me how to do that?
Yeah, I haven't done it for a while myself, but I think you need to start over.
Okay. And reset. Okay.
Like go through that set of stepwise instructions.
Oh, okay. We're just gonna start from scratch.
Okay, just go ahead and go next.
Do you want me to go
Don't
next or
don't-
skip all the instructions?
Do next. And yeah, Baz is good. Select contaminant. Okay, select thresholds.
Oh, so you can like enter it?
Okay. I'm not, I need to poke around with this.
We're rusty. That's okay. Regardless,
Sorry.
um,
I'll look at it and get back to you guys
yeah,
shortly.
no worries. So we can circle back to that, and we'll show that on this recording so we can walk people through it. Regardless, we are also developing the SWAMP data dashboard. So as I mentioned, this includes all statewide SWAMP data and regional water board SWAMP data. It's been updated today, evidently. And this shows you about the data sources and how to download the data and things like that, and some information about the application. So the back end of this is open source, and so folks wanted to take pieces they could. We're going to close out of this. Like I mentioned, some of the functionality and even all of the data hasn't necessarily been added to the dashboard yet. So we're we're flying a little bit blind here, but I want to identify features for when folks do get started before that, hopefully April deeper demonstration. I anticipate things being updated and ready to go on this, hopefully next month. So it's really, really close to coming soon. And we're always adapting and revising. So the functionality of wanting to put in your own thresholds, for example, that could be something that we incorporate in the future. So the big thing is the statewide monitoring program. You can filter by program. So we're going to shine a light on our bioaccumulation monitoring data. If you're interested in a particular region, you can narrow your search to that. It looks like there's a lot of example data in Southern California, unless someone wants to shout out a region that they want to highlight here. Okay, we can always change it. So we're looking into that one point. Anna, again, there is more data. This is in progress, 2 points. You can filter by a specific category or parameter. So this is the example I'm talking about. Right now, it just has water and sediment data. So there's actually no tissue data yet. So these are all test data, but you can filter and then download stations or the results when you're ready to do that. And once the data are available, you can click on a site and it has information about that site for you. So like I mentioned, we don't have any tissue data yet to show, but this is just kind of the basic functionality of this resource at this time. And when the tissue data is incorporated, we will be shouting from the rooftops. So you, I'm sure, will hopefully hear about it. So that's just a high level view. Oh, there's a map view. And then if you are just looking for the table, there's a tabular view of all of these things. So, and this is something that we have dedicated staff continually working on. So added functionality and features will be able to be incorporated over time. And one request that I have had is to link locations with OIHA consumption advice so that you can see the data and the advice at the same place. And that is already exists in the Safety portal, among other things. Okay, questions? Yeah, Jay.
So sorry to interrupt, but I've figured out how to do the thresholds. And it sounds like Sarah needs to leave, so
Yeah, let's jump
go
over.
back
Let's
to
do
that
it.
map. On the right side, it says select contaminant thresholds. And you can customize
Okay,
and enter whatever threshold you want.
great.
And so I think if you're interested in a particular consumption rate and the OIHA advisory tissue levels, you could just refer to that report and find the thresholds that correspond to the higher consumption rate. So they go down below the 0.07 that was in there as the lowest level as a default.
So I'm
That's
just
helpful. I think I put something in the chat that came from the Fraser Schilling study. And I think maybe during one of these workshops, it's like, okay, so we have, at least a starting point for rates per day, grams per day. I'm not sure how that would translate into this parts per million. Like what equation is it to get it to that point? But thanks for showing the customized threshold. That's very cool. But yeah, it'd be great to have a little help with that translation.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll cover that at the next training.
Cool.
And then
Thank
I'll
you.
also note too, as part of the thresholds project, our Civic Spark Fellow is working on, we can add that to her list of that translation to make how to do that well documented and easier to find and easier to use. So it's not just retained in our brains. Awesome. Thanks for poking around, Jay. Any other questions on the data products or anything folks want to see before we move on? Okay, great. We can always circle back. So I'll leave these links open. So in addition to the raw data, the program also summarizes results in a number of ways. We document things in a bunch of different ways. So going from left to right, we have strategic plans. So think of those of like medium to long-term monitoring plans. We're going to be developing one this year for the long-term process of the program, using the feedback we receive from the long-term monitoring priorities assessment process and feedback, and that survey that we added to the chat. So all of that's going to be kind of summarized into a new strategic plan that we'll be developing this year. And it'll be at least a 5-year plan. For those that do monitoring, you already know about QAPs, quality assurance project plans. We have to do those too. So we actually just finished a QAP, and it's the US EPA requires that we revise our QAPs every 3 years. So we just did a QAP that summarizes all of our water bodies. The QAPs are like in the weeds. Which methods do you use? All of the nitty gritty, all the secret sauce for how we do what we do. And we just published one last year. So if you're trying to develop a QAP for bioaccumulation monitoring, or you want to look and see what we do, if copying any of that and pasting it into your QAPs is helpful, and you want a Word version of some or all of that QAP, please just reach out. I would be happy to share that with you to make your life easier if you're interested in bioaccumulation monitoring program stuff. As I mentioned, annually, we kind of look at our strategic plan and then create a monitoring plan for that year that, again, follows the long-term strategy and the QAP methods, but centers what we're going to be doing for that year. And this is where we incorporate the feedback we receive for regional boards, OIHA, and hopefully in the future, tribal governments and others interested in bioaccumulation monitoring. We kind of capture that into our monitoring plan and then do the monitoring. After monitoring, the Moss Landing Marine Pollution Studies Lab, who conducts our monitoring, so they are a contractor of ours, and they do the monitoring according to the plans that we outline. They create cruise reports that summarize where they went, what they caught, how it went, all of that good stuff. Those are also posted online. And I actually just finished preparing the cruise report from last year's lakes monitoring. So that should be posted online shortly. And then once we receive the data from the labs, we also have data reports that, again, summarize the data for monitoring that year. And then if we're looking at a reflection of the strategic plans, I ran out of room on this slide, but there's more. We're looking at summarizing how we did according to our strategic plans. We also have interpretive reports that kind of take a long view of how things went over time. So those are the different types of documentation that exist currently for the statewide program. I'll note that through the realignment process, we also have a tribal engagement plan. We talked about communication and outreach plans through that process. So this is just kind of like the core of monitoring documentation, but we are trying to do better about documenting how we do what we do in other ways too. So if there's something else you want to see from us, please let me know. I'm happy to figure out what that would look like. And everything is posted on our website currently. And if it's not, you're not seeing something, you can't find it, feel free to just reach out to me and I'll be happy to either direct you to the location or send you a copy. So we talked a little bit about, at a high level, how our data are used. We mentioned the integrated report in OIHA. So just wanted to provide some links and dive a little bit deeper on all of those things. So as I mentioned, the California Integrated Report is done through the State Water Board's Water Quality Assessment Unit in the Division of Water Quality. And US EPA charges the water boards with conducting a statewide assessment every 2 years. And the integrated report is made up of a list of impaired waters that's known as the 303D list, a 305B condition report, and the integrated report in recent years has also has a data visualization that there's a screenshot on the right-hand side here that makes it easier for people to find the results of those reports in an easier to use way than going through all of the detailed documentation. The dark green areas indicate water bodies that have been listed for some sort of impairment. And the light green indicates that the water body has been assessed but has not been listed. And I'll also note that the integrated report goes well beyond subsistence, consumption beneficial uses. This is all of the beneficial uses that the water boards is responsible for protecting. Right now, the integrated report is from 2022. And so it was a pull of 2020 data and back, and they did their assessment and created the report. They're working on 2022 to 2024 now. So that's data up to 2022, I believe. And that should be finished. I believe the board has already approved it, and it's been, it has to go through internal processes. It has to be approved by the state board. And then it's submitted to US EPA, who then also has to approve it before it's finalized. And that is expected in the spring of this year. I'll also note that while they're wrapping up integrated reports or assessments, they're starting new cycles. So right now, the 2026 integrated report is in process. And I just wanted to flag that they're munching all the data right now. They've completed the data ingestion part, and so they're reviewing the millions of records and conducting their initial assessment. And it's anticipated that there will be a public review and comment period in the spring of 2025 for the next integrated report. So just flagging that for you. Again, all of the blue underlined things are links, direct links, so you can kind of jump to whatever is of interest to you. Any questions on the integrated report? Okay, great. So we've also talked quite a bit about fish advisories. So wanted to, again, dive a little bit deeper on that. There's 4 statewide advisories that don't include, site-specific advice for fish that migrate, so coastal fish that migrate, lakes and reservoirs, coasts and rivers and streams. So if there's a water body that you're specifically interested in that you don't see a site-specific advisory for, the best next step would to, again, follow the guidance for a statewide advisory, but then also wanting to acknowledge and remind ourselves that these assume recreational consumption. So these don't necessarily reflect tribal subsistence or cultural consumption of fish and shellfish. But it's a good first cut on understanding which fish are safer to eat in water bodies near you. In terms of process. OIHA can generate or update 9 to 12 advisories per year. And so they have a long list of advisories that they want to develop, and they look at the data availability. They have opportunities for folks to share their feedback on which areas are of higher priority to you. They utilize the Safe to Eat Workgroup to hear that feedback, but then you can reach out to them directly as well. And that might help, increase the priority of a water body to move it up the list, the to-do list. And as I mentioned, OIHA regularly engages with the program through the Safe to Eat Workgroup to share what their priorities are, what their data needs are, so that we can collect the data to help fill data gaps for advisories that they'd like to develop. And I also wanted to shine a light that Sarah couldn't stay with us after the break, but the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians reviewed the Clear Lake advisory that existed and noticed that species that were important to the tribes were not reflected. And so they reached out to OIHA directly and kind of flagged that, and OIHA went through their process to add those species to the advisory. So this is the newer advisory. It was updated in 2018. And I know that because of this little line, the bottom right side of the advisory. And this is a great example of, I think, how tribes can make sure our state processes are capturing your needs through process that already exists. And we're working together again to figure out how to develop guidance that better reflects consumption and other needs for tribal consumers.
Anna, could I add something?
Absolutely, please.
And it's kind of obvious, but the reason OIHA could add these species is because the Pomo Indians had the data. There are minimum data requirements, but it's obviously the data did exist in this case, so that OIHA could go forward. OIHA, like Anna explained, works very closely with the STU on the swamp monitoring to let us know, what's missing for each water body. So I'm sure they would work with tribes to let you know if there's a certain species that we don't quite have enough data for yet. They would let you know exactly what is needed to get that species added to an advisory. But kind of behind this, you have to have the data to get a fish species put on here and put it in the right place.
Yeah. And OIHA has actually given presentations to the Safe to Eat Workgroup on those data needs. So that already exists. And I can share that link with folks. But then I'll also note that OIHA is going to be involved in the next training to share some high-level needs as people are developing monitoring plans, and then also a deeper dive at the end of this year, October to December, we're thinking, for like really behind the scenes look at OIHA process for how they do what they do. Any questions on OIHA or integrated report before we move on? Okay, great. So we kind of covered how we know that our data are used regularly, but there's other ways that data can be used. One of the big ones is through the regional board's tribal beneficial use process. So as many of you are probably already aware and potentially already actively engaged, each of the 9 regional boards is updating their basin plan to incorporate tribal beneficial use definitions, and then also to designate water bodies in that region with those uses. That process requires tribal engagement. And so you'll notice at the upper right-hand corner, we're kind of in the green quadrant here. And there's a distinct difference between the regional board authority in this process and what the SWAMP Bioaccumulation Monitoring Program can do. So I just want to be really like explicit and clear about that. The statewide SWAMP program has no influence on the regional board TBU process. We have no authority over that process. That is solely handled by the regional boards. But our data can be used to inform those conversations in that process. And so that can be used in many ways to potentially kind of help the regional board see where consumption is happening. Like if our data or an OIHA advisory are associated with a water body, then it's pretty clear that we think someone is consuming fish or shellfish at that water body. And that might help with those conversations. There's a link here. The top one is to the Tribal Beneficial Use webpage from the State Board Tribal Affairs Office to kind of explain the process and things like that. There's also the Regional Tribal Coordinators link in the middle is a link to a page of contacts. So if you don't know who your regional tribal coordinator is, there's a link with their email there. So to make it easier to reach out to them directly. And there's a fact sheet that's on the main TBU page that kind of dives deeper into TBUs. And I'll also flag that I think Sarah brought it up too, but SIA leads the facilitation, I believe, of a tribal-only TBU strategic caucus that meets regularly, I think monthly, I'm not sure, to talk about these issues amongst tribes and to help coordinate and things like that. I don't know much more than that, and I don't want to speak to that. I would much prefer Sherry or Sarah or anyone else that engages in those processes to say more if that's something that you're interested in. And if it is, I can reach out and get more information from Sherry to share with everyone. Any questions on that?
Hi, this is Javier Silva. I don't have a question, but yeah, I do participate and I do work with Sherry and Sia. So I just wanted to say I'm on here last minute. Sorry, apologize. Sherry is en route, but apologizes for not being here. But yeah, we do meet monthly right now, a month across the state to talk about the process that each of the regions are going through. So yeah, it's a good conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Javier. No apologies needed. Thanks for joining when you can. And thanks for plus one-ing the TBU caucus. So another way is through development and potentially review of water quality objectives. So these are basically at the core of everything the water boards does. And consists of those numeric thresholds that we've been talking about when we're talking about consumption thresholds and things like that. So we've already talked about the need for thresholds that better reflect the consumption of tribal communities through just subsistence or cultural purposes. And I know developing those thresholds in a way that's statewide and consistent, conversations are happening about that. But I don't really have much more to report, unfortunately, there. But in addition to numeric thresholds, there can be narrative information that's used to complement the thresholds as part of the water quality objective. So I know a lot of the conversations I've been having in the bioaccumulation space, and I'm also the tribal coordinator for my office, there's a real need for us to work together to review these thresholds and think about ways to adequately protect waters for the use of tribal needs for culture and subsistence and other things. So I'm hoping that as these conversations continue, our data are used to help support those conversations and decisions. And I've designed things like the realignment process and how we're changing how the safety work group and the program operates to be better documented and more inclusive, so that it's easy for people to grab and go in terms of what they need to help support those processes in a way that makes sense for them. And then I think that's it. I should know, I made the slides, but the rest of the time is really open for folks to, happy to answer any questions. If you want to share about what you're monitoring or what you're interested in, we have a couple more slides to kind of think about next steps in the upcoming trainings, but we really wanted to pause and make space for any conversation you would like to have about anything that we've covered. And again, I'll just note at this point, I can cut the recording. And so any conversations that we have during this time can be excluded from what's posted publicly. And we'll kind of decide on that at the end of the meeting together today. So just flagging that, so it's easy for me to find this and pause here, but then to make everyone aware. Are there any questions or things that folks want to discuss or hope to see in future trainings or resource, anything? The floor is yours.
And if there's not anything else coming up, I could, you talked about, talking about the trainings that are coming up. I'm leading the next training that's on monitoring design. And, along with Wes Smith from OIHA and Tessa Foja from the Water Board. And we want to tailor the training to the questions that the group has and try to make it as valuable and interesting as possible. We want to try to make it interactive. We're thinking of just kind of on the fly, considering a couple of examples of water bodies where maybe you're thinking about starting a monitoring effort, and it might be helpful to you to have the group, have our panel, and then the group think it through with you. So any thoughts people have along those lines, we can talk briefly about them now if you're ready for that, or you can email me. I'll put my email in the chat. Anna's probably interested too. You can copy Anna, but we really want to make the next training as valuable as possible. So it would help to know what your major questions are about monitoring design and starting a monitoring effort.
Yeah, Javier, go for it.
Well, there's a lot, but so a lot of it's good to see what is available as far as data, but it's also good to understand what tribes need to bring to the table as far as what level of efforts we need to do as far as sampling. Do we need to get out and do fish tissue sampling in all the rivers and creeks? I know that there's priority set to the Clear Lake Basin area, the watershed, because of the mines issue and the pollution there. But can that level of data, or is there, can that be expanded upon, or is there more information? Like, so I have interest in the North Coast. Of course, the Russian and the eel are two of my main watersheds and concerns, and also the coastal watersheds. And so, you know, is the tribe like, are the tribes needing to develop, you know, fish tissue monitoring, along with water quality monitoring, along with the looking at the you know, using the term right now,
Bioassessment?
well, like the bioassessment, but doing, you know, collecting bugs
Yeah,
and
yeah.
checking for bio, along with chemicals. So, you know, EPA funds only so much, you know, and you know, Sarah's been great at finding other funding to do some additional fish sampling. But, you know, I would just, you know, I'm just kind of curious to, you know, what the state has been doing, what is getting done around where we're at, and then what should be, you know, and then that could determine what we need to focus ourselves on.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So we can talk about that. And I think related to that is how in Wes Smith from we I can talk about this. How many locations do you need to sample to generate an advisory? In lakes, it's, you know, we have a kind of set way of doing that. It's a little easier, but for rivers, you know, it's not as clear. So we can talk about that sort of thing. So great.
And I
Okay.
also want to thank you, Javier, for speaking up and acknowledge and hope that this training series, and particularly this training, can help begin to shine a light on where data information exists, whether a tribe should do bioaccumulation, that's your decision. But our hope through developing this training series is to make it easier for you to find information that you need to help make that decision, and really make it easier for tribes. If bioaccumulation monitoring isn't in your budget, but you know things should be happening, like, please feel empowered to lean on us and tell us where things are important for you, and we can incorporate that into our monitoring so that that data is collected and captured, but it's not funded by you if that's something that you don't want. There's also, just wanting to acknowledge, sometimes it's appropriate, many times it's appropriate for tribes to do their own monitoring and not communicate with the state, because that's your business. And we also fully support tribal sovereignty and tribal data sovereignty in that sense. And so these trainings, again, are meant to be a resource to help build capacity if that's what you would like, or a way to broaden our community so that we can lean on each other to help get that data information that's needed to protect the waters that are important to all of us.
Yeah, and I guess that leads me to another question. That's great. But the advisors around these water bodies, and they're focused in around fish,
Yeah.
but not plants
Yeah.
and water quality. So I kind of, so like, you know, Cache Creek area, you know, there could be some red bud collection, harvesting in the drainage there that also has a fish tissue advisor, a fish advisory. What does that mean to a tribal member? What does that mean? What is, you know, and what, because my concern is that their health impacts from something that they put in their mouth or that they're down there in the water. So those things that we think about too, as far as
Yeah.
using the data for those kind of impacts.
Absolutely. And I think we mentioned earlier the concern around plants. You're not the first person to bring it up. And I think there's, from what I understand of the need is high. We need that data and information yesterday, right? But the science in terms of what I'm aware of for how we would assess bioaccumulation of toxins in plants That's not super clear to me yet. That doesn't mean it's not clear to others. It just means it's not clear to me. And so really looking for partners in the tribal space. We're considering speaking to the academic community, anyone interested in bioaccumulation, to really identify and begin to answer those research questions so that we can kind of bring that into the fold of bioaccumulation knowledge and share the landscape around that knowledge. I'll also note potential limitation. We haven't really come up against it yet, but just to be super transparent, the SWAMP Bioaccumulation Monitoring Program was created in response from legislative bills that specified that we assess for fish and shellfish. So there is that legislative potential boundary there. That said, the Safety Work Group is a work group of the California Water Quality Monitoring Council, and it doesn't necessarily have those same limitations, although it's not a funded work group to conduct the monitoring. That's where the SWAMP Bioaccumulation Monitoring Program comes in. But that said, that work group can be used to help facilitate coordination, communication, building partnerships in those spaces. And we would be more than happy. Jay is the co-chair of this too. That's one of the reasons why he's here. He's also the science lead for the Bioaccumulation Monitoring Program. So we contract with the SFEI with Jay, and he helps us make the magic happen. So just wanting to articulate those potential boundaries or limits, but also acknowledging that that legislation was created a long time ago, and our priorities are to operationalize racial equity and open data and transparency. And so we're going to do our best to support folks as best as we can, given those limitations. I know that sounded like bureaucratic nonsense, and I am sorry about that. But anyway.
Appreciate the answer. I know I've talked with DTSC about their cleanups and discuss uptake and what levels need to be cleaned up, that to consider reuse of land, whatever. So I think that the DTSC could be something tribes could reach out to too. And then in the US EPA, there is a tribal science council that are looking for tribal priorities in different parts of the United States. So Region 9, San Francisco, California, Arizona, and Nevada area. So I'm trying to reach out to them to see if they can focus in on maybe having some research funding available for tribes to do some of this. But so it goes back to the tribal beneficial use stuff that you brought up, because this data can be used, but it'll be limited because we need a lot more of this other data that is required too. So, but thank you for answering that. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And if there's anything like if there's an ask for a need for research for whatever, and you want to reach a broad audience that can include, but includes other people outside of the tribal knowledge space, feel free to send me things directly. My email information is at the end of the slide deck. I'm happy to share content through our Safety Work Group email list, if that's helpful for you. Again, it's not appropriate for all things, but please use us as a resource when that does make sense and is comfortable and is something that could be helpful for you.
Yeah, I'll add to what Anna was saying, maybe just saying things a little bit differently, but you guys may bring up things that we don't, I don't have experience with monitoring plants for, bioaccumulation for human health risk assessment. And OIHA doesn't, hasn't traditionally looked at that, but I think bringing up these issues in these trainings and bringing them up in the Safety Work Group is a great way to put these issues on the radar of the agencies, and to get OIHA to start thinking about the need for that and you know, acting on that need, and for the water boards to do that as well. So we may not have great answers to everything right now, but we're a great forum for moving things in the directions that they need to go.
Thanks, Jay. Any other questions? Otherwise, or topics to discuss? Otherwise, I'll keep it moving so we can end on time. But we've still got a few minutes. Okay, great. Awesome. So just kind of circling back to potential next steps for all of, there was a lot of information that was shared today. So like fire hosed you with so much information. So just kind of wanting to circle back and remind us of potential next steps and opportunities to engage, if that makes sense to you. Again, for the long-term monitoring priorities assessment. So this is an opportunity for tribes to help direct the program on what our priorities should be for the coming years to help fill those gaps that we've been talking about. Mostly for fish and shellfish, but as Jay said, bringing up other issues is always welcome. If you want to present at either the January 31st or February 28th meeting, like have a space on the agenda, feel free to email me so we can coordinate and get that all situated. If you want to provide feedback but don't want to present, there's the Bioaccumulation Monitoring Priorities Survey that we ask folks to complete by March 1st. Again, so that can be incorporated into the synthesis and summaries and priority conversations. Moving to the realignment, if you would like to participate in the realignment for the San Francisco region, feel free to email me. If you know of folks, of tribes that maybe aren't on the NAHC list that you think would be interested in the realignment, please share my information with them. Feel free to share these slides. Though I'll send an email today to everyone so you have a PDF of the slides. And then the recording will be posted hopefully by the end of the week. And I usually in the middle of a cycle, we start thinking about the next cycle. So I'll be doing my, statewide outreach to speak with tribes and regional boards and others to figure out which region should be the next region. Next. If this was your first introduction to the program and the Safety at Work group, and you want to talk more about anything, but you don't want it to be during a recording or in a public space like the Safety at Work group, feel free to reach out to me directly. There's a tribal engagement forum that we have. All that really asks is who you are, what you're interested in, and who should be included in the meeting. And then I will reach out to you to help coordinate that. And it can be a kind of one-on-one with you, other tribal staff that might be interested in the conversation, and myself. Here, there are links here to join the Safety Work Group list, a link to our meetings page to see upcoming meetings. I'll also note, similar to these trainings, our Safety Work Group meetings are held over Zoom, and folks need to register in advance, although you can register that day and attend, but we want to have that custom link for you. And if you're doing awesome bioaccumulation work and you want to, again, shout it from the rooftops, we'd love to have you present if that's something that's of interest to you, to share your knowledge landscape with the Safety Work Group community. And that's it. I want to acknowledge again that this training series would not have been possible without the encouragement and support of Sherry Norris, who wasn't able to join us today. But I've been communicating with her while we've been here, and she's gonna attend future trainings. There's some resources at the end of this slide deck to just highlighting work that SIA has been doing, and links to their toolkit and health brochure, and additional links for the program and things like that. So like I said, All of these will be shared in a PDF to everyone who registered for the training today. I'll share that by the end of today. And then before we close, how are folks feeling about posting the Q&A sections publicly? Should I eliminate that? Are you okay with me keeping it in the recording? Okay, feel free to email me offline if you think things should be removed. And then I saw, Mike, I think you came on camera. Did you have something you wanted to share before we close today? And I see your comment in the chat, so I got you covered. All right. Well, thanks for being amazing and being able to register and attend this with such a tight turnaround. We'll give you much more notice for the future. And I thought there was, oh, the bioaccumulation training series. I knew there was a slide. So the slides and recording will be posted again by the end of this week. Jay talked a little bit about the training that he's going to be leading on February 20th. So here are links to register for those if you haven't already. The next training will again be focused on study design and prep. So if you have feedback on topics that should be covered, things that you want to kind of highlight, feel free to reach out to Jay and he'll help facilitate that. Looking ahead into March, we're going to be talking about like hot tips for sample collection. So we're going to hear from our Moss Landing partners who do the collections for us, and they'll kind of go through the things they think through when they're headed out into the field. In September, we'll begin to talk about data quality and potentially submission to SWAMP and CEDN. I also think that will be a good place for us to talk about how WQX and CEDN talk to each other or don't, and how to lower the burden of on your end from getting tribal data into CEDN, if that's something that you want. At the end of the year, we'll talk about, you've got the data. How do we interpret it from our perspective? How have we interpreted in the past, and what does that mean for us? And then at the end of the year, as I mentioned, OIHA will take a deeper dive into their process. Okay, now that's it. And we got 5 minutes to spare. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time, hopefully.
Thanks for joining, everybody. Thanks, Anna.
Bye, y'all.